In section 3 of the NEC, there's a list of requirements to be included within the accepted programme, which then have to be reproduced and updated for each update to the accepted programme. It's about a dozen odd items. Does that make the requirement of the programme overly complicated, Ewan?
It could present difficulties on day one of the contract if you're demanding all that information on day one of the contract, because sometimes it simply isn't known. Whether the design has been completed, whether subcontractors are appointed, whether you really need to plan works that are a year out in a high degree of detail on day one is probably not necessary. But it's a contractual clause, an obligation, but it needs to, I think, recognise what I've just described. Not all information is known, the programme evolves, levels of detail will be added, and it's a very good checklist in my view of what's required. And there are certainly some parts that are essential parts, from the timing and the duration and sequence of the necessary activities, but perhaps the detail that can be provided is in weekly slots rather than sort of daily operations.
So, John, thinking of that list, there's things on that list like you must show the start date and the finish date. Do we really need to get down to that level of detail, or is that just adding a clause for the sake of having a clause? Because surely everyone knows if you can have a programme, you've got to show a start and you've got to show a finish, otherwise it's not much of a programme, is it?
It actually says the starting date, which is when the contract comes alive, and planned completion and the contractual completion date. So it strikes me that as a contractual document, it's quite important that those things are in there, with the proviso that just because a project manager accepts a programme with a wrong completion date in it, doesn't transfer liability, because that's through the compensation procedure. So no, I don't think those things are accepted. I think what you have to do, or are unacceptable or over the top. I think what you have to do, though, is recognise that essentially programme is how engineers write fiction. And the further the time frame is out, the more it is a work of fiction. And therefore it's not worthwhile doing it in detail, because it'll change as you go out there. So you don't want the project manager and the contractor having to do the detail when it will change, but you might well want an idea of what that is and the general strategy and how they're going to approach the works.
Ian, looking at it from a cost point of view, is all that information that goes into the programme really necessary to help manage, identify, justify, demonstrate the cost impact of everything that's going on? Or are we just sort of adding additional requirements into the contract to make us all feel comfortable that we're getting something that feels right, rather than something that's beneficial and useful to the parties?
Well, I think certain elements of it are very relevant to cost. Because you look through the list of items required to be shown on the programme, and it goes beyond the sort of Gantt chart and just the times of activities, but also goes into the types of resources to be used, how the contractor plans to undertake some of the major operations. So that should link back to some of the costings. You should be able to look through and see what sort of time and cost has been allowed for certain things. So if you do then get compensation events, you're trying to forecast defined cost, you can use the currently accepted programme as a guide to help forecast and agree the potential time and cost impacts of compensation events. Other elements of it are more to do with the actual time itself, but as we know, time is money, so there's always a correlation.
25 years ago, Ewan, when the NEC first came out with this sort of list and idea of detailing a programme, it was very much against a backdrop of none of the other contract forms really having a requirement for a contract programme, let alone updating one. And you could see the justification for explaining what was expected of a contract programme. Do you think the same really holds true now, 25 years later, with the extra sophistication that there is in the industry, particularly around programming?
Yes, I think the NEC 3 has very laudable aims in prescriptively setting out what's required. It's just good practice, good management. It's not necessarily the ideal for every project, but even if you look at JCT contracts where the programme requirements are nowhere near as burdensome, it's still good practice, and I still see written into the contracts preliminary section setting out you should set out your critical path of the programme. It should be updated on a monthly basis. So I think it's just general all-round good project management and holds true 25 years later.
So picking up on that point, when the NEC came out, I thought that one contractor I used to work with was very astute in that they recognised the emphasis on programming. And in the same way that they traditionally would have a QS supporting their site agent, they said actually to comply with the NEC we should have programmers, planners supporting our site agent. So for a regional business of around £70 million, they had about 6 programmers. And they said they got the benefits. They got the benefits from doing the work more efficiently out on site, just better planning. And when they were taken over, they were praised for being one of the most profitable areas of that big group. But they also said when it came to justifying their compensation event assessments or the quotations, that it was so much easier having that detailed programme.
And just one final point I'd like to make is, in terms of you're saying it's just good practice and the industry now produces programmes of this calibre anyway, it may well do, but by having it in the contract means they have to share it with the employer. And it's a joint project management tool, the programme under the contract. So you'd have to have it within the contract to make sure it's still being used as that tool that both parties have access to.
Summarising that conversation then, there is a lot of detail in the contract in section 3, but it's not unnecessary detail. It's useful detail, regardless of the sophistication that we think there is in the industry. Actually, it sets the right framework, it sets the right tone, it gives a nice baseline for the parties to build on if they want to, and everyone knows what information it is they're going to be sharing between themselves, so everyone's working off a common basis from the outset. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.